And yeah, I was going to say, do you want to kick things off, Mark, or would you like me to?
Yeah, sure. I can kick things off. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Let's see, this is our first meeting for 2023, so we're happy that folks could join us. And we got message from other folks that can't, but just the reminder that this will be recorded and we make it available on our YouTube channel. So that's good. We usually get 40 to 60 views on those, so it does feel like those are useful for folks if they can't make it. But of course, it was like when people can join us, but we want to make these as widely available as possible. So anyway, today we're going to talk about a few things here, provide some web services and WordPress, just general awareness updates, talk briefly about a recent change that's happening campus-wide about new UW fonts that hopefully many of you saw like an eCals post, and also a couple other messages from us. Then Al's going to do some cool demos of some new blocks and updates to blocks and some patterns and features, as well as demoing these in a new launch of the Animal Dairy Science website that they redesigned their site into our CALS v4 theme, into the new theme, which looks really, really great. Then I want to just provide a little bit of update on the Google Analytics 4 transition. And then it says QA at the end, but please feel free to ask questions as we move throughout the presentation. We don't want to just be talking the whole time. So please, yeah, feel free to turn on your mic or raise your hand, or however you would like to ask a question. So, and then, yeah, you all know us, Al and Mark, the web services team. Next slide, please. So just a few updates kind of in different aspects of kind of the things that we've been working on. Again, lots of fine tuning. We feel like we've got the new CALS v4 theme in a real solid spot, but still lots of fine tuning, adding blocks as requests come in from site owners and content managers for different features. And whether that's a block or a pattern, a page pattern or a section pattern. We've also been working on some specific plugins for like our DEI, Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, as well as our business services, so like a training plugin. So look for those. Those will be coming on the admin site probably within the next couple of months. And then I put the UW font update here, but I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. In regard to infrastructure, yeah, so we kind of leave the plugin audit migration work. That's just sort of ongoing as we have that all elusive free time. We kind of get back to going through those plugins and getting those, but we've made a lot of progress, and that's looking really good. Just some general updates. So WordPress is now updated to the 6.11. And so 6 was kind of the major upgrade where they really introduced a lot of the blocks, kind of crystallize a lot of the block stuff, and they're adding the site block editing features. So the 6.11 was sort of a minor update, just fixing bugs, things like that. And then also we threw in for those sites that are using the UW theme, part of that font transition was updating the UW theme on our platform. I think there's about 26 sites on our platform that are using the UW theme. And so those all got the UW theme update. I think it was, I think we were actually at like 1.19, and it went up to 1.21. So that theme update included some sort of features and fine tuning, bug fixes, but the biggest update for that was the integration of the new UW fonts. And then just a few support documentation and training things we're working on. So beginning planning and finally getting to improve, kind of updating, fine tuning, improving our documentation. One piece of that is a cool new thing Al worked up recently was which we'll demo, is our kind of everything kitchen sink demo page, where we at least wanted to start to showcase some of the blocks that are available to give you ideas of what things you can do with some of the different blocks in the block editor. And then just to mention, our next web services webinar, we'll be looking at the May, June timeframe. So, but we'll send more in our follow-up newsletter. We'll send a specific date here in the next few weeks. So yeah, and then just yeah, now feel free to jump in on any of this if I miss or skip over something. So
Sure.
yeah, so just a quick update on UW fonts. So we had back in January, we worked with Janelle and Nick from the External Relations group, because there's a big UW fonts update, and generally what's happening is there's two fonts that UW had been licensing called Verlag and Vitesse. And the short of it is those got very expensive. I think there was some kind of changeover in who owned those fonts. They've decided to transition away from those fonts to some open source variable improvements in font called Red Hat. So that's basically what's happening. There's a big transition not only in web but also print that is happening. And Janelle and Nick are kind of heading up the print side of it. And Janelle, you can correct me if I misspeak on anything. So the big update here was on February 16th. We updated all of our CALS themes, so the 2015 theme and the CALS V4 theme, and any child themes that reference those. So we updated those. UW, the Whisk Web team, updated the UW theme, which we also updated on our platform. So anybody who uses any of those themes, just automatically on February 16th, you may have saw that they're similar fonts. There's definitely differences, but it was a subtle change. So some may not have even noticed if you hadn't seen any of the news, but so that happened. Everything went pretty smoothly. So that was kind of the big update for in terms of the website of fonts. The key date really is June 30th. I believe that's when the license, our current license with Verlag and Vitesse ends, and so that's kind of what folks are shooting for in terms of transitioning away from using those fonts. There's a lot of asterisks there. So we've listed the resources like eCals and the brand. So if you have questions about the print side of things, I believe you can direct those to Janelle or Nick. Because there are, when I say there's asterisks, I think there's, I sat in last week on a update on UW fonts from you, Mark, and the brand folks. And, there's a lot of nuances of if you have a bunch of PDFs that use Verlag, you don't necessarily have to go back and update those, but it'd be nice if you do. So there's some of those things, and you can get all of that information on these resource pages. So likewise, if you happen to have your own theme and you are using those fonts, there's instructions here on how you can do that font update yourself. So did I miss anything maybe in that, Al or Janelle, if you'd like to?
I think you covered it well. I'm curious if Janelle
Okay.
has any additional things she would like to add at all. You don't certainly have to, but again, I want to make sure we properly direct everyone to the right place if they have questions on this.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, all. I think you covered it pretty well, Mark. I will just add, any questions print related, do come my way, or Nick Hawkins will definitely help you out. If we can't, we will point you in the right direction. And just to reiterate, as Mark said, there is gray area here. And UMark is doing a pretty good job of addressing that. So like if you've got a huge stack of fact sheets, like deplete your resources certainly before feeling that you need to make the update. So yeah, and we're just kind of shooting for that June 30th deadline for some of the kind of non-critical pieces out there that have both Verlag and Vitesse used in them. So slowly but surely we'll get there.
So Janelle, just a quick question. I'm just going to bring this up from chat. Sarah had asked a little bit about business cards. I'm assuming you might think of that in the same way you just advised about some of those other FAQs. It sort of, is it okay to deplete existing inventory before worrying about reprinting those? Any advice you want to give for Sarah? She's wondering about updating of business cards.
Yeah, good question. So I'm not sure. I mean, there could be some business card iterations out there that I'm not aware of, but if it follows the UW standard card design, those do not use Verlag or Vitesse, thankfully. So we are in the clear. They do use Lado. Mark, you had referenced that font. That's used, and that is not impacted by this kind of university-wide font transition. So I think you should be okay. I will also refer you to the brand.wis.edu because I believe they cover logo and business cards on that site.
And we'll add links to this. You'll see links in the slides, but we can add those to chat here in a little bit for those that are looking to want to jump to those right away. So
yeah.
Good.
Excellent. Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah.
Thanks, Janelle. I'll just drop those links in here right now and folks can click on those.
Excellent. Anything else we want to add for fonts, Mark? Otherwise, we'll jump into next.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to add,
topics.
but does anyone have any other questions about that? We're happy to field those. Okay, yeah.
All right.
Of course, feel free to reach out, after this if questions do come up.
Excellent. Well, I will demo a few things here, and hopefully I may do it not exactly in the correct order here, but we'll find out here in a moment as I get into things. A couple of things that we're going to demo today include some updates and things that have been applied, both in terms of helping with planning and research and layout, as well as a notable mention and call out to the animal and dairy science folks for their work on their site recently. And in addition to that, some examples of some of the key updates that we've applied, things that have been changed since perhaps some of you may or may not have seen in the last couple of weeks and months here. So looking at some of the first things, one of the things we're going to link here, and we've been working through this just recently. So you will find this to be linked out soon. I'm going to add this link in chat, but we will be adding this link directly to the top level of the CALS webhosting.cals address soon, so that those may be looking for it will be able to find this a lot easier in the future. But the idea is just to have a kitchen sink of elements as we tend to look at it. And this is similar to if you've seen the kitchen sink of page elements, for example, on University Marketing's version or UMark's version of some of their resources as well, or the Whisk Web theme as well. So this is just there to give you a sense of what are some of the things you could do in the editor. I think one of the most common things we run into with folks that are working on a page or working on a new website are just understanding what are possibilities, what are the possibilities of what they can actually apply. And that's obviously incredibly difficult for anybody if you just have sort of a blank canvas in front of you. It's only easier for maybe Mark and I, being that we made them, we know they exist, right? But it's harder to see that. So one of the things that you can do in this element here is just to come here and start to look at what are some of the things you could be applying. I would say that this current page isn't fully complete yet, but we are getting there with additions all the time. And so you can actually come in here and just see different elements. And our goal is going to be adding some additional functionality to this in the near future, so that if you see a particular layout that you like, you'll be able to just hit a quick copy to the clipboard button, and then you can paste it into whatever page layout you're working on. So that'll be something that'll be coming in the near future for something like this. But it does give you a little bit of a sense of things you can do, right? There's different button styles, different layouts, iconography, functional components like countdowns or other things of that nature, different layouts, right? A lot of things that I think are pretty common, but maybe not are entirely obvious that these are options you can apply and maybe what you might do to apply them. I think some of this might give more of a hint than it is necessarily to be an obvious example right away. But one of the things we're doing, apart from not only trying to make this page more available and functional for folks in terms of making something that they see here available on their own page, but we're also adding these same patterns into the actual page editor itself. So when you're working on a site, and we'll go over that in just a moment, what you actually see in terms of being able to just pick something and dump it onto the page as well is hopefully pretty helpful. One other thing I'd like to also make a mention out to as well before we jump into some of these other page elements is the Animal and Dairy Science website has recently launched, and their update to their site is now live and using the new CALS v4 theme. We've seen a really positive response from a lot of folks that are using this theme and trying to do some of the new things layout-wise that they're trying to accomplish, both in communicating to outward audiences as well as internal audiences. So a lot of what you might see, for example, on their new site here, these are all things that are part of the CALS v4 theme today, but another great example of different things in text that you can take when it comes to trying to lay out content and try to engage folks with whatever you're trying to communicate. So I definitely recommend taking a look here sometime and get a good peek at what they've been able to build. So I think they did an excellent job, and I really look forward to seeing what they're building next. So one of the things that we can get into during any time here in this questions and answers as well is just what we'd like to do to make some of this sort of example as well more available to folks. We worked hand in hand with Animal and Dairy Science to help them get these layouts applied. And a lot of that means that there may be other layouts that other folks are trying to do and they cannot find a good way to do them. And the goal is not to I don't want the technology to get in the way of your ability to communicate online, right? So this is where we need to come together and talk about what you'd like to do and figure out how we can make that work best for what you need to do. So I'll give a couple examples here as we dive into just a couple of quick demos. Let me grab a couple of things. I'll just do these sort of in elements as we have them on the slide here. But we have a couple of things that one of these is a little bit more of a reminder. I don't remember if we've gone over this before, but we'll cover it anyway. And I think it'd be great to just review some of this. So for those that have been in the actual WordPress editor in some time, some of these are going to be things you've already seen lately, or if you haven't been in here lately, this might be something new. So I'm going to go ahead and make an example page here just to give you a quick demo. If I were to take a look here, one of the things I want to call it right away is that Mark's work on getting the new fonts updated is already reflected in the editor. So if you worked in here already and you had anything like a heading or a paragraph or some other copy, you're already going to see the updated font selection here applied. So that's something that you should see notable as well. One of the other key things is that apart with this font update, we did take a little bit of a look at exactly what are the overall directions from brand.wis.edu towards what web font should be present. Obviously, the primary one that you've seen perhaps that demonstration earlier, as well as the announcements from University Marketing, were to put Red Hat, both Red Hat Display and Red Hat Text. We did also get additional direction and advice from University Marketing on alternative typefaces, and that's something that we are taking under consideration for a number of these things. The main one that we have applied right now that's allowed throughout the CALS v4 theme is to utilize Merriweather. So if you're looking for some sort of complementary typeface to go along with whatever you're building, and you've looked at, let's say, wisc.edu in the recent, and any time in the last several months, you've probably seen Merriweather. It's this typeface here that's making up the headings in some of these spaces. So this is an available typeface. It's not set as a default, but if you are working on a heading in any space, you will see this available to you as you work in that, work on copy there. So let me give you a couple of quick examples here of some of that animation, and I'm going to do that in context with some of the typeface things. So again, if at any point here, someone has a couple of quick questions, just feel free to add them in chat or even jump in on the mic if you'd like to. One of the things I'll do right away is I'm going to jump in with a pattern just to see how things look. And if I take a look at any particular element, so I'm going to jump in just to call back to that font update we just mentioned. In this case right here, I've got a heading, and right over here, you can see I can choose that highlighted serif font as well as the Red Hat display font that should be the default. So you can make these choices where it need be, but if you're looking for advice on when to apply it or how to utilize these best, I do encourage you to reach out to us. I'm always happy to help with that sort of thing. You'll see a lot of the patterns will give you a lot of best practices, but there's always there's always going to be, you know, those exceptions, right? Those different situations that will warrant maybe making a little bit of a change. So if we're looking at something, let's say like that animation component, to be specific on that, we can see here that if I were to look at this page, I'm going to go ahead and look at my test page here, and I'm going to go ahead and view this. And I will see here, this is kind of the layout I have, right? And this works, this is fine to start with. One of the things that we've seen be used, as long as it's used in, I think, sparing ways, that can be very powerful, is some animation. So one of the things that you can do now within some of the spaces here, and we do limit it to specific elements, is to be able to apply some amount of animation to elements arriving onto the page at the point in which they're viewable to the user. So if I said something, let's say like slide in from the right on this particular column here, I selected the column element and added that animation. And if I go back here and refresh my page, you can see it slide in from the right, right? So we can make other different adjustments. There's a few different animations. There's fade in, slide in from different directions. These elements, again, I think can be used to good effect if they're used correctly. And just to see how this would work on an element of the page that's maybe farther down, I'm going to just apply a quick pattern down here as well, and give you a sense of what that might look like. So if I grab something, let's say like this, and I'm going to go ahead and close each one of these, and I'm going to just slide in on the left for the ones on the left, and slide on the right for the ones on the right. And you'll see that this animation does not occur since this element is far down the page up until the moment that the user actually were to scroll down and actually see it. And once the animation is triggered, it does not re-trigger. We don't want to give anybody any sort of, you know, strobing effect when they're jumping in here to look at the site and have something repeat over and over again, right? So it applied once. If I scroll back up, come back down, it's just present. So that's on purpose. That's by design. The other thing to keep in mind too is you saw all those elements slide at the exact same time because we all told them to slide at the exact same time. If I come in here, I can apply a delay to, let's say, these ones below them. I'll give it one of those 0.25 second delay. And upon doing that, I can come back here. And as I scroll down, right, there's a little bit of a staggered approach there. So just some nice little trigger elements you can do to apply some amount of animation to the page. These are built in this very specific way so that if a user comes here with different needs, they've either got animation declared to be off based on their needs for any disability or any ableism issues that they may have, that they'd like to have that animation not be present, that animation will be off for them. So don't be alarmed if there's somebody that says they don't see that animation ever. That may be specific to their use case. The other reasons we have here is to make sure that this animation is also triggered only when needed by the browser as it's called. So any scripts that would cause the page to load should not cause anything that would get in the way of users at least still seeing the content. Again, the primary goal here is that the user see what you have to say. Animation is purely secondary. So that is the animation side of things. We have a couple other elements I'll just highlight kind of quickly here that have been pretty useful. One of the things that I sort of glossed over when I looked at the animal and dairy science one, but they used as well, was sort of this flipping card effect. So there's a new element you may see whenever you're building a page. And if you build a page in this space, if I go down here and add a new block, one of the new blocks here is a card flip item. So you can actually do a card flip here. And then what happens is it creates two elements, a front and a back. And within that card, you can then decide if you just want to have text, if you'd like to have a background, or even an image using something, let's say like the cover block. So if I were to come in here and say sample heading, and perhaps below here as well, have an additional one. And I might say for this rear one here, I'm going to give this a background of UW red and choose the white to go with that. And we're going to see, actually, if we have any issues with this, we'll find out in a moment. One of the things that is happening with some of these elements is they are so new that we are discovering new things all the time, and we need to adjust them. So this one's full width, right? So it takes up the whole side. I think what we'll want to do is make sure we can limit the width of some of these as well. Yeah. We often advise these with use in cards so that they don't take up the entire space, and that has a huge impact on how they look. So if I just go in here and actually make a couple of these elements. Right now we get the 3. So this just gives a really basic approach to this. I think there's a lot of ways that we're going to be adding additional styles and things to actually give a specific look to this sort of thing when folks want to apply it, because it's going to end up having a different look and feel depending on if you apply an image or anything that's in between that sort of space, iconography and things of that nature. The last thing I want to also cover too as well is that as you work with some of these elements, if you do encounter a space where something is not operating as you would expect it to, please let us know. Again, always write to us at websupport@calsource.edu. We can definitely take a look and see if there's particular use cases that you're applying it to that need to be adjusted to make it work better. One other element I want to demo here real quick is the modal block. So in this particular scenario, there's another element you can choose from now within the CALS blocks, which is modal. And the way this works is this has 2 forms. So if I were to give you a quick demo of how this looks, I can say this is an example modal message. And right now, by default, this modal will not apply or not be visible because we need some way to trigger it. Modal messages are designed in such a way that you have to apply them in a way that they're visible to the user only upon an action being taken. So if I were to go ahead and want something like this to be applied, and I could put anything within this modal space, one of the most common elements we're looking at here is forms as a potential option, having a built-in contextual way to trigger a contact form based on an action that even if it's a lengthy page, you can still see the content right away. Versus, some other elements of content as well. But that's probably the most specific use case we've seen so far. You can see that my modal has a name, and it's currently modal 1. This is a name we auto trigger by default, but you can give this name anything you'd like. You can name this to, favorites, CALS department, whatever that would be. I don't know that. I'm not going to pick favorites here, so we're going to just say favorite. So if I said favorite, and then I went over to my button here and I gave it a call to action, and I said, I gave it an anchor tag of favorite. All right, so if I do that, I go down here to where that button appears and I click on it, there's my modal message, right? So you can actually trigger messages or updates of this nature in different spaces on your site, and then have those things pop up like contact forms and things like that. Mm-hmm. You can also apply these modal messages in a couple of different ways, also as sidebars as well. So if I just switch this style to right-hand edge, and I go ahead and take a look again, you can see it pops up on the right-hand edge, right? So a couple of different ways you can apply that. That's modal block. There's been a few additional block elements. I'll just make some light call out too. The carousel block is been updated to allow for, if you've used it currently, you've kind of seen it like this, right? Where you have sort of a large image. It started as just something that required the use of the cover block, which does require an image, right? And you can either stick an image in there or set a background color, but it still sort of required it to be that type of element. We recently updated it to also allow the group block. So as you go ahead and work on a particular carousel, you can even mix and match it with cover blocks, but you can then add in basically add a slide that would just be text. So if you were working on a carousel here, and in this scenario, I'm going to add another one. Instead of just adding the cover, you can now add a group. And within the group, you could have anything you want. If you had, let's say, a large testimonial statement, something to that nature, you could say, and this may not be the best example because I'm about to mix and match a very plain language looking slide with a whole bunch of very graphical ones. So you want to use this in the correct manner, but you're going to find that that this is another great way you can potentially apply this sort of thing. There's a lot of cases where in design, if there's a requirement for a photo and there's not really anything contextual to the content, it often almost detracts from the content, right? You end up picking a photo that is just sort of maybe placeholder or a sample image, a clip art of some sort, right? And that ends up, if anything, maybe being more of a distraction. So you can add something to this, and now as you may work with a carousel, it's going to actually allow that content to be in that same space. So you have, right? So I have my sample author one, but unfortunately it's not very large compared to these, so it's taking up very little space. So another thing that we're adding updates to all the time is trying to improve the different ways you can use some of these pieces of content. Last but not least, the remote content block has received a few additional updates to make sure that it can display a little bit more specific elements. If you've looked at some of the different ways you can apply remote content on a site, this is a thing that I think a lot of people already know about, but we'll just sort of call to it real quickly for those that may not have used it lately. There's a remote WordPress content area block, and what you can do is set in here anything you'd like to pull onto your site. So in this scenario, I'm pulling on the latest post from news.cals.was.edu. And you can even pull on the latest 2 posts, let's say, for example. The other thing that this allows you to do now, though, is also display featured image and choose between a list view, as it would start normally, as it has been in the past, and as well something like a grid, which might display it with a background image if a background image is present. So these are some new ways that we've added to this space here. But the remote content block is a nice way to kind of be able to go in and make a little bit better use of that display of content that is already a wealth of information coming from areas like Campus News and Grow Magazine and the latter. You can go in and be able to pull in some specific information, be able to highlight that there. That's made of great use, I think, on the ag research stations, for example. They get to show ag research specific pieces coming from news.cals right on their page without having to do sort of a manual copy and paste, if you will. So I think with that pretty much covers most of the updates. I'm going to just I'll jump back into the slides here, but if anybody has any questions on some of those blocks or how to use some of those things or anything else that they just saw in the editor that they weren't sure about, feel free to pipe up in chat or ask those questions later too, if you'd like. I think either way, there's a lot of new additions that are continuing to come along here, along with some of those things that we've talked about with fonts. So there's always something new changing. So I think the only other thing, Mark, that I was thinking about potentially just making one more call out to, and I think you did near the top, but I think it's worth making a note to as well, which is, as Mark talked about some of the efforts going on, for example, to make things like DEI learning modules available and things like that on the admin page. There are a number of different specific components that we build in web services that are for a specific use case. And oftentimes that's for organized data, right? So in this case, keeping track of the learning modules themselves, or in other cases, you've seen directory information. So if you happen to have a particular site you're trying to develop content for, and maybe it has a long list of content of things of that nature, I would say definitely consider reaching out about whether or not that's something that would be useful to you in that particular context. A lot of these elements that we build, like the learning modules, are built in a modular way so they can be actually reused. And you just have to make that request. And that would be something that we could actually apply as well. Or if it's something that's a truly unique maybe case, that would be something that we could work with you on, maybe what that element might look like and maybe something we might be able to build up in that regard. So but yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. Any other thoughts or questions? I apologize. I have to look at chat. I don't know if anything's popped up yet. Maybe not yet, but
no questions yet at this point.
All right.
But
excellent.
If anyone has any, I was wondering, Al, you could show I think another good modal example, because I just think that's a really nice option. But you put in the kitchen sink, and a good example of, I believe, if I remember right, a form in a modal on our kitchen sink.
Yeah, I think, and I think there is one there, and I want to say
just
there's
to
also
show
within academics as well. But I want to say, let's see, did I do that in this display modal sidebar? Yes. So
yeah,
here
right there. Yeah.
So you can see
so
this.
A good example of.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I pulled up this modal and I can fill out the form.
And so that's just a gravity form, block inside the modal container, kind of like Al showed. So yeah, another example of what you could potentially put in that sort of modal block to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities of this. I mean, considering that effectively a lot of these blocks, we do not do any significant amount of limiting to what you can put inside of another block. There are certain places where we do a little bit, but just for example's sake, it's possible to mix and match a lot of these things, right? So you can obviously use things like the icon block within that modal, if that's helpful, right? Or
Mhm.
a countdown. If you had a piece of information that was important for folks to get to, and at least there was a deadline, right? Sometimes like something like this can be a little bit of a good reminder of, hey, don't forget to do this now. You've got 30 days to do this kind of thing, right? So and you can have a call to action right below that, for example, that might then bring up that form without it necessarily taking up all kinds of space. Because if you had a layout, something like this, and it was 3 columns, you don't want to try to stuff a form into that little tiny column on the right. So yeah, good example of maybe how that could be used.
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent.
All right.
I will pop this up here. If you, I don't know if you'd like to
Okay.
talk a little about Google
Sure.
Analytics.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Google Analytics 4 transition. We hadn't provided an update on that for a little bit. And as a reminder for folks that aren't aware, so Google Analytics is transitioning from what they call Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 or GA4. So that transition is happening on July 1st, 2023. And basically what that means is if you have an existing UA Universal Analytics property that's collecting data on your site, that will stop collecting data on that date. So that's kind of the target date for updating, doing a migration from Universal to Google Analytics 4. So recently, like I got a couple starting in kind of mid-February, a couple of emails from Google. So we also want to bring this up because we're not entirely sure who these went out to. We don't know if it was anybody who was added to a property or what roles. So if you've got one of these and we're confused, Al, on the next slide, I just had a screenshot of the email. So you may have got one of these. This was new to us, but something it looks like they're going to do is do an auto update. If you have a Universal Analytics and you haven't updated to GA4, they're going to create that GA4 property. So what does that mean? Well, I've been looking at Google's documentation. It's mostly clear as mud, but no, it's fairly clear. What I think is they're making unclear is it's the way this email reads. It sounds like, oh, cool, I don't have to do anything now at all, which is not like completely true. They will create the GA4 property for any existing Universal Analytic property that exists. So they will create the GA4 property, which will start collecting data at the day it gets created. So that's good. And the way their migration works, which I'll have a screenshot of that, it basically creates a GA4 right in parallel to the UA4. So if you have the UA4 connected to your site, that will collect the data and it will basically share it across to the GA4. So they'll both be collecting data until July 1st. The thing you'll still have to do though, before the July 1st date, is go to your site, if you're the one in control of your Google Analytics property, and swap out the ID tag from the UA number to the GA4, or on that date, it'll just stop collecting. That's my understanding from reading the documentation. So it's not like everything will be done for you, but it's partially done. Now, I also just wanted to mention, and again, we have links on the slide, recommended links, but the other thing is, so this auto update will work if you have a very basic sort of vanilla Google Analytics setup now. That auto update will probably be fine. But if you're using things like Tag Manager and you have event tags and things like that, you will definitely want to do, they recommend you want to do your own migration, because the auto migration will kind of just do a generic. It'll create a generic GA4 and it won't include some of the specific settings that you may have had set up with your Universal Analytics. So just kind of, we wanted to just put this email in context so people kind of weren't concerned about that. So that's all that is doing, but they will start doing that in March, this auto update. And it also looks like from the documentation, even if your property does get auto updated, but you need to do some additional settings, you can just go into that new GA4 property and add those settings, add those additional events, tags, whatever, or you can simply delete that GA4 and recreate a new one, or migrate everything over into Tag Manager if that's what you're using instead. So it's not like it won't completely disrupt everything. So just keep that in mind. So enough of that. Next slide, please, Al.
Yeah.
So yeah, so trying to distill what should be done. Yeah, so actually next slide, please. I think I talked mostly about most of this through. So kind of the TLDR here is, do you need to do anything? Okay, so if you're the Google Analytics, if you're the one that set it up or your site owner, then you're gonna be the one that needs to do this updating. Some of your sites, so there's going to be different scenarios. Some folks' sites don't have Google Analytics. In that case, if you don't have them or don't want to set them up, then you can completely ignore this. If your site does have Google Analytics and you or your site owner is the one that set up, then you'll be the one that needs to work through this process, because we likely don't have access to your Google Analytics property. And then, so that's kind of scenario one. On that, we're working on a blog post with some steps, because the Google Analytics documentation is helpful, but there's a couple of specific things to the CALS WordPress steps that they won't obviously cover. So we're working on a blog post that will kind of step those folks through just to help you do this and complete this process. So that's kind of scenario one. Scenario two is there are a subset of WordPress sites on our platform that our team, web services team, set up the Google Analytics property for, and we will be taking care of those. We will lead that process and we'll reach out to those site owners, but just know that's a smaller subset of the 250 plus sites on our platform. These are mostly like our news and eCals and CALS main and some department sites. So more than likely, if you have Google Analytics, you or a site owner probably were the ones that set that up. But definitely reach out to us if you do have questions. I have a couple other slides that can kind of walk you through the next slide. Yeah, so for those that are kind of wondering, how do I know, right? How do I know if I'm updated or not? So a couple of slides here just to help kind of, so you can check. So if the first way is you can go to your Google Analytics dashboard and look. So if you go to your admin, so log in with, some of this you're gonna have to maybe figure out, because some sites have a site owner that may not be work in the organization anymore. So anyway, this is one. If you know you have access to your Google Analytics dashboard, you can log in and go to the admin settings, and in the middle column here, you'll see under property. If you see a UA dash, then that basically means you're still using the older UA, and you need to go through the migration. The other one is if you also see, you'll then see the GA4 setup assistant, which is the link you click to then walk you through setting up that new GA4 property. So if you see those, that's the indication that you likely need to do your upgrade. Okay. The other way to check, if you don't have access to a Google Analytics dashboard that you know of, that's on the next slide. You can look inside your WordPress site. If you log into your admin dashboard and go to appearance, customize, and again, this is if you're using either our CALS 2015 theme or our CALS v4. You'll see an analytics option in the customizer, and in there, the first field is where, if you have Google Analytics, there'll be a value in there. There'll be a tracking ID. That's one. So if you don't have a tracking ID, then you're not even using Google Analytics. Number two, again, if it's a UA number, then you need to one, figure out, okay, who has access, and two, you need to do the migration. If you see something with a G dash, then that means you're good to go, that you have a GA4 tracking ID. So those are kind of two ways to check, to try to figure that out. Okay. And then, yeah, this was just kind of I put this slide up to remind everyone to mention that we'll be basically providing a blog post, and we'll send that out soon, that documents kind of the steps if you have for the CALS WordPress platform site, how to do the migration. But basically it's just Google Analytics 4. They did a nice setup assistant. So it's fairly straightforward. You just kind of click through. So anyway, that'll be forthcoming here in a couple of weeks, and we'll send that out through our newsletter, through our blog. So with that, I think that we've come to the end, and happy to take any questions about anything we've chatted about today.
I don't see anything in chat yet, but if anybody has any further questions, or if you have something that you'd like to follow up with later, you're welcome to just send that to us. You can, of course, reach us directly, reach us in Teams, or of course, send an email out to the address you see there, websupport@cals.west.edu. So if there's any other additional things that come up, please feel free to bring up now. But otherwise, thank you so much all for being here. And we always appreciate getting a chance to talk with all of you. If there's more things that each of you are trying to do and feel like you could be better supported on doing that sort of thing with your website, please reach out to us. We'd like to be able to do everything we can to help with that. So
thanks, everyone.